I moved into my dream home in a peaceful, secluded area that had everything I wanted: privacy, space, and most importantly, no HOA to deal with. The property was part of a larger neighborhood but was explicitly excluded from the HOA, as stated in the legal documents when I purchased it. My private road, which led directly to my house, was fully owned and maintained by me, with clear property boundaries that ensured no one else had the right to dictate what I did with it. At first, everything was great, until I started noticing strange letters in my mailbox. The HOA had begun sending me dues notices, claiming that I owed them money for community upkeep and that I was part of the association. I ignored them at first, assuming it was just a mistake. But then, the letters became more aggressive, threatening fines, legal action, and even property liens. I responded by sending them a copy of my property deed, highlighting the fact that my land was not under their jurisdiction. I thought that would settle the matter. But no, things only escalated from there. HOA board members started showing up at my house, demanding payments and insisting that I comply with their rules. They said I was using community roads and that I needed to pay my fair share, even though my road was privately owned and not connected to their main streets. Then came the real trouble. One morning, as I left for work, I found my driveway blocked, completely obstructed by a massive semi-truck, parked sideways across my private road. I was in shock. I walked up to the truck, expecting to find a driver inside, but the cab was empty, locked up, and clearly meant to stay there. A bright orange HOA violation notice was taped to my mailbox, declaring that the road was restricted until I paid overdue fees. My heart started racing as I realized what they had done. This wasn't just a billing dispute anymore, this was an all-out war. I stood there, staring at the massive semi-truck blocking my private road, my anger bubbling over. This was no misunderstanding, this was a deliberate act of harassment. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the HOA president, a smug, power-hungry man named Richard, who had already been pestering me for months. The moment he picked up, I let him have it. "You have no right to block my property," I yelled, pacing back and forth. His response was as condescending as I expected. "Sir, since you're benefiting from our community, it's only fair you pay your dues," he said smoothly, as if this was all reasonable. "Until those fees are cleared, we reserve the right to restrict access to the roads within the neighborhood." I gritted my teeth. "It's my road, Richard. Private property. You have no authority here." But he only chuckled and hung up. That's when I knew this wouldn't be resolved with a simple phone call. I immediately called the police, expecting them to step in and put an end to this madness. But when the officers arrived, they were frustratingly neutral. They told me it was a civil matter and that I'd need to take it up in court. My stomach dropped. Court? That could take months, and in the meantime, my road was completely blocked. I argued that this was illegal trespassing, but the HOA had fed the officers a different story, claiming that the road was part of the common areas under their control. The cops left, essentially telling me to work it out with the HOA. That wasn't happening. I wasn't about to be bullied into paying fees for a group I had no legal obligation to. I needed to get that truck moved, and I needed to send a message that I wasn't the kind of person to be pushed around. So, I came up with a plan. I called a private tow company and told them I had an abandoned vehicle on my property that needed immediate removal. They arrived within the hour, and when they saw that I had the title to my land proving it was private, they didn't hesitate to hook the semi up to their tow truck. As they were about to haul it away, Richard and a few HOA members came running, screaming at the tow truck driver to stop. "This is HOA property," Richard shouted. "That truck is legally stationed until this resident pays his overdue fees." But I stepped forward, holding up my property deed. "No, Richard. This is MY property. And this truck? It's illegally trespassing." He fumed, his face turning red, but the tow driver wasn't interested in HOA politics, he was just there to do his job. The semi was dragged off, leaving my road clear once again. But I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had declared war, and I had just fired my first shot. I barely had time to enjoy my small victory before the HOA struck back with a vengeance. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of construction equipment. Groggy and confused, I stumbled outside to find a crew of workers digging up the entrance to my private road. My stomach dropped as I realized what they were doing. They were tearing up my driveway. A small group of HOA board members stood nearby, arms crossed, smug expressions plastered across their faces. Richard, ever the power-hungry tyrant, stepped forward with a fake look of sympathy. "Since you're refusing to contribute to the community," he said, loud enough for the workers to hear, "we've decided to repurpose this space. You can't just use our roads for free." My blood boiled. "This is my property," I shouted, holding up my deed again. But he just shook his head. "That's up for legal interpretation," he smirked. "In the meantime, we're making some necessary changes for the benefit of paying residents." I couldn't believe it. They were literally trying to destroy my access to my own home. My immediate instinct was to call the police again, but I already knew how that would go. Instead, I stormed over to the construction crew and demanded to know who had hired them. The lead contractor hesitated before admitting that the HOA had told them the road was part of the neighborhood's common areas. I wasted no time. I pulled out my paperwork, showing him my property boundaries, and flat out told him that he and his crew were trespassing. That got his attention. He immediately stepped away to make a call, no doubt realizing that if he continued the work, he could be liable for property damage. While he was distracted, I turned back to Richard and the HOA members. "You're going to regret this," I hissed. But they just laughed, confident that they had the upper hand. "Good luck fighting the HOA," one of the board members sneered. "It never goes well for people like you." That was it. That was the moment I decided I was done playing fair. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. While the construction crew hesitated, I called my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one who specialized in property rights and HOA abuse cases. The moment I explained what was happening, he was all over it. "Get every piece of evidence you can," he instructed. "Photos, videos, statements from the construction crew. We're going to bury these guys in legal hell." And that's exactly what I did. I took dozens of photos, recording every bit of damage they had caused so far. I even got one of the construction workers on camera admitting that they were hired under false pretenses. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to make the HOA's life miserable. As I stood there, phone still in hand, Richard's smug grin began to fade. He could see what I was doing. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Oh, I know," I shot back. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." He didn't realize it yet, but the tides were turning. The HOA had overplayed their hand, and I was about to hit them where it hurt the most. The HOA thought they had the upper hand, but they had severely underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what was rightfully mine. I spent the next few days working with my lawyer, building an airtight case against them. We compiled every letter they had sent demanding dues, every voicemail they had left threatening legal action, and every bit of photographic and video evidence showing their illegal actions, blocking my private road with a Semitruck, attempting to destroy my driveway, and even lying to contractors to perform unauthorized work on my property. My lawyer was ecstatic. "This is a goldmine," he told me. "They've committed multiple legal violations, trespassing, harassment, destruction of private property, even potential fraud." With everything ready, we fired off an immediate cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding that they not only halt all further actions against me, but also pay for the damages they had already caused. I personally delivered the letter to Richard's house, knocking on his door with the kind of satisfaction that only comes when you know you're about to ruin someone's day. When he answered, his smugness was gone. He looked at the letter and scoffed. "You really think this is going to scare us?" he muttered. "HOAs win these kinds of cases all the time." I smirked. "You clearly haven't read the law. This isn't your typical HOA dispute, Richard. This is a full-blown property rights violation, and you guys just committed multiple felonies." I walked away before he could respond, knowing that the real battle was about to begin. My lawyer wasted no time filing an official lawsuit against the HOA, naming Richard and several board members personally. The charges? Illegal trespassing, property damage, harassment, and fraud. We were also seeking full financial compensation for every single dollar they had cost me, along with punitive damages. But we didn't stop there. We also filed for an emergency injunction, demanding that a judge immediately order the HOA to cease all activities against me and acknowledge my road as private property, permanently removing it from any false common area of claims. The legal process moved faster than expected. It turns out, my case wasn't just strong, it was bulletproof. The HOA had left a paper trail of their abuses, and my lawyer tore them apart in court. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, watching as Richard and the other board members squirmed in their seats. The judge listened as my lawyer presented our evidence, first the fraudulent dues claims, then the illegal truck blockade, and finally, the unauthorized destruction attempt on my driveway. The judge's face hardened with every new piece of evidence. Then came the best part, when my lawyer played the video of the construction worker admitting that the HOA had lied to them about ownership of my road. That was the final nail in the coffin. The judge looked directly at Richard, his voice dripping with disapproval. Not only is this a blatant abuse of power, but it is also a direct violation of private property rights. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here, and your actions were illegal. Richard tried to stammer out a response, claiming they had acted in the best interest of the community, but the judge wasn't having it. You don't own this road. You never have. And yet, you and your board have harassed this homeowner, committed trespassing, and attempted to destroy his property under false pretenses. This is unacceptable. The ruling came swiftly. The HOA was ordered to pay full restitution for damages, including the cost of legal fees. But it got even better. The judge ruled that my road was to be officially recognized as private property, with the HOA permanently prohibited from making any further claims on it. To top it all off, Richard and a few other board members were personally fined for their roles in the harassment. As I walked out of the courtroom, I caught Richard's expression. It was no longer smug. It was pure, seething anger. But I didn't care. The law was on my side, and the HOA had just suffered a devastating defeat. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final move left to make, one that would ensure they never dared to mess with me again. Winning in court was satisfying, but I wasn't about to let the HOA off that easy. They had tried to ruin my life, block my own property, and harass me into submission. Now, it was time to make sure they never pulled this kind of stunt again, not on me, and not on anyone else. With my legal victory secured, I went straight to work on my final plan, exposing their corruption and hitting them where it hurt the most, their wallets. First, I took my case to the local media. HOA abuse stories were always a hot topic, and with my mountains of evidence, including photos, videos, and the court ruling, it didn't take long for a local news station to pick it up. Within days, my story was all over social media and even made it onto a primetime investigative report. Viewers were furious. Homeowners from all over began sharing their own horror stories about this HOA, revealing a pattern of bullying, excessive fines, and fraudulent dues collection. Suddenly, Richard and the HOA board were under public scrutiny like never before. Their little kingdom of power was crumbling. But that was just the beginning. Armed with my court victory, I went after their finances. My lawyer and I discovered that the HOA had been mismanaging funds for years, using HOA fees to cover personal expenses and shady projects. We handed all of this information over to the homeowners in the neighborhood, many of whom had been blindly paying their dues without realizing they were being scammed. Outrage spread like wildfire. Residents started demanding financial transparency, forcing emergency meetings. When the truth came out, it was chaos. People who had once supported the HOA turned against them overnight. Board members were resigning left and right, and Richard? He was forced to step down in disgrace. But the best part? The financial damage. The HOA was already struggling to pay the restitution and legal fees from my lawsuit. But now, with homeowners refusing to pay their dues and demanding audits, their entire budget collapsed. They couldn't afford basic maintenance, their insurance skyrocketed, and eventually, the HOA itself fell apart. The very organization that had tried to force me into submission ended up self-destructing under the weight of its own corruption. As I stood on my private road, the same road they had tried to block, I couldn't help but smile. They had tried to bully me, extort me, and destroy my property. But in the end, they lost everything, while I walked away with my land, my freedom, and a well-earned victory. And the best part? I never paid a single cent in HOA dues.